Hi everyone, this is Lawrence Rogers, and I'm doing my presentation on the benefits and challenges of competitive music events in our schools. This is something that I've done for now the past 12 years, being a high school band director. I've worked at two schools, both of which have been competitive high schools, and I teach high school band. So hopefully this is something I can talk a little bit more at length about, and hope you enjoy the presentation. As I said, I'm generally in support of music competitions. Uh, my thesis statement is surrounded on the idea that there are an abundance of positives that support schools actually participating in music competitions, going to festivals, getting ratings, and being adjudicated by adjudicators. I feel like the benefits to the students, the directors, and their schools in general essentially outweigh the negatives. And in many ways, it helps drive and facilitate a lot of what my students are learning in my classroom. All right, so before we get into the pros and the cons of music contests, I'd like to give you guys a background on the history of music competitions throughout the United States and over the course of time. In the US, music contests and festivals have been a national tradition for almost 100 years. Music programs of all sizes and many different demographic areas of our country participate every single year in music contests being hosted by local schools, music organizations, and organized high school associations as well. The history of these music contests is an important component to understanding the relationship between contests that emerged in the 20th century and the contests of actually present day right now. And the rich tradition of these contests actually dates back to singing contests that existed in Europe, such as German Meistersingers and Meistersingers. And these were contests and events that began in the 7th century and continued until about the 14th century when Welsh eisteddfods became popular. And in 1737, there were contests held for vocal music and violin in Virginia, and the tradition of these eisteddfods continued actually in Pennsylvania and Kansas over here in the US during the 1800s. These singing competitions became popular in the state of Kansas during the 1800s. The All Kansas Music Competition Festival was formed shortly thereafter in 1912, and that was as actually an outgrowth of these original festivals that were hosted prior to that. Soon after, there were events for high school bands in Emporia, Kansas, which those started in 1916, and also solo instrument contests in Lindsborg, Kansas, which started in 1919. So with all the interest in music contests at the turn of the 20th century, it seems natural that a national contest would eventually become formed. The first national contest for bands was hosted by the Music Industries Chamber of Commerce, which was on June 5th through the 7th in 1923, and that was here in Chicago, Illinois. The National School Band Tournament was held in Grant Park, and it was somewhat similar to present day contests with regard to classifications for bands based on the type of school and the grade level. The first national orchestra competition then actually began in 1929 with the inception of the National School Orchestra Association. Although this organization would hold its last competition in 1937, it shows us still the major influence of the band contest movement from earlier in that decade. In fact, here's a fun fact. The very first band that won the national band competition, the first year it was hosted in Chicago, was actually the Joliet High School band program when it was just one school and now it's Joliet Central. But that band was the first one to win the national contest. Here are the benefits of music contests that I was able to find throughout all the research that I pulled up. Those four main themes emerged sometimes multiple times throughout different research documents. And those four themes are community support and enthusiasm, directors being able to shape their reputations as well as learn more about their profession. Competitions help improve instrumentation as well as pedagogical materials. And finally, music contests help improve student citizenships, as well as musicianships. So let's get into these 4 main points. Public relations is an extra musical positive benefit for the school stemming from students participating in marching band. After the drum corps style of marching was introduced in the 1970s, marching bands became incredibly popular within the communities. We see this still today as a pattern with Drum Corps International, now known as DCI, which has seen a lot of interest in marching and pageantry arts. Rogers' findings indicated that the value of marching band contests today was rated highly on a 7-point scale. So what he used is a scale of 1 to 7, 1 meaning no value and 7 meaning great value by both directors and principals. Band directors on average gave public relations a score of 5.39 out of 7, and principals gave public relations a 5.83 out of 7. So this indicates that there's a good amount of value that can be found in participating in competitions by both directors and the admin. Another study found that preparing for contests increased the group's spirit. And if students have a great sense of pride, they're obviously going to be invested in their school or program. The level of interest and enthusiasm for music programs works in the same way regarding student perceptions of the music contest experience. Being invested in music comes not only from the participants and directors of these programs, but also the community in which they can either thrive or wilt. And according to Williams, music contests began in an attempt to generate actually more interest in instruments, thus increasing the sales for those instruments and major instrument manufacturers during the early 20th century. What is important, though, to note is although national contests may have started for this reason, they certainly influenced interest and enthusiasm for even more contests to be held in subsequent years. Music festivals and competitions became a really great source for community pride, and also even railroad companies would give discounts to contest participants as they traveled to and from music contests. Supporters of these competitions generally cite an increased interest in school music by both parents and the students. There were also several connections between music contests and how directors thought these events helped shape their reputations and skills as music professionals. Professional recognition is at least one reason music teachers may want to bring their groups to a contest. If they are seen in the community sometimes as successful and participating in competitions, then the director might be also viewed as a great teacher by their students. Younger directors also noted as using contests to gain some validation in the school and the surrounding community. So when directors compete with their groups at a festival or competition, they use their results sometimes to compare themselves with other music educators. O'Leary's 2019 study showed me that directors are always trying to prove themselves to their friends and colleagues, which I can totally attest to as a band director. So there was also much stress put on the directors as a result of this. So typical festival ratings were sometimes briefly discussed while also stressing the fact that only one rating is desirable by directors, which is a first superior score, naturally. Directors clearly want their ensembles to do well and achieve great things, and by doing so, they're able to help shape how maybe they are perceived as directors by others in our profession. In regards to instrumentation, there was actually instrumentation requirements that were implemented in the 1920s, which actually caused bands to adapt a new set of requirements for music contests. So due to the work of organizations like the National School Band Association, performance standards actually increased, which resulted in a change of manufacturing of those instruments. So instruments actually got better as a result of this. Even band programs that did not compete were affected by the music contest movement. The organizers would distribute national lists of required instrumentation, as well as a suggested repertoire list that they would think that would be appropriate for school competitions, which ultimately ended up resulting in a higher quality and amount of concert repertoire becoming available. And this was really just due in part to the additions of standard instrumentation. So a wider array of pedagogical materials also became available as a result of these developments in the music profession, according to the researchers below. So for this next benefit, there is just a ton of research out there that shows music contests will help improve student citizenship as well as musicianship. One of my friends and colleagues, Justin Antos from Dwight D. Eisenhower High School, was really, really nice to allow me to use his doctoral dissertation for this project as well. And he wrote that in 2017. And in it, he asserted that students' perception of their improvement in class shows that a majority of the students actually responded favorably, such as agree or strongly agree, when they were asked if participating in contests helped them in the following categories, such as keeping band students on task in rehearsal, making sense of adjudicator commentary, teaching students a variety of musical styles, and even developing students' musicality. So these are all components of obviously improving oneself as a musician and as a citizen who contributes to the school community. Mr. Antos also reported that students care less about trophies and sometimes more about achieving individual and team goals, which is fantastic. Student effort was frequently mentioned also as a citizenship skill. The experience of participating in music contests is something that research suggests makes our students work harder, and they will then ultimately, they're going to put more practice and effort into what they do. The general benefit to student learning was also present in most of these studies, and researchers were able to collect data from other music teachers that indicated preparing for adjudicated events and then basically benefiting student learning. So musicianship ultimately was noted to improve when ensembles participated in contests. Now that we've covered most of the benefits for music contests, let's also talk about some of the challenges or negatives regarding music contests. The four main themes that started to emerge throughout the research also showed that judge reliability was an issue, financial support and cost, as well as implications for teachers being assessed, and finally, a possible restriction of other musical skills and development by participating in contests. All right, so judge reliability is always something of a debate when directors take their bands, choirs, orchestras, or any performing group to a contest. Even with the first national band contest that happened in 1923, there was an article published actually that same year arguing the possibility of unfair evaluation by the judges. In more current research by Rawlings, he stated that although the experience of attending adjudicated events can be a learning tool, sometimes the feedback from the judges doesn't justify the rating or the score that they give out. So he's gone on to acknowledge that directors have openly stated that they need to be careful in picking out the right music for the judges at those particular shows. In other studies, we've had the analyzation of ratings of large group festivals. And one of those studies showed that the groups who performed more difficult music earned significantly higher ratings of festivals than ensembles who performed less advanced selections. Some of the points made were that this could be a result of adjudicator bias towards smaller, less experienced groups. However, it also was just more likely that the ratings were actually based on the actual music performance of those groups. Still, there's a possibility that adjudicator bias could have played a role in the adjudication of these groups. But Borst and Norris in 2007 cited some research by Fisk, and it was revealed that judges' evaluation tools were sometimes not practical or time efficient for scoring individuals in a solo contest. The study by Norris and Borst was based on using two different adjudication forms. They had Form A, which was a traditional form, and then Form B was a form that was used off a rubric from Washington State. And while neither form showed a favorable amount of clarity when it came to judging rhythm, the research indicated that Form B provided a much clearer tool to delineate the particular achievement by an ensemble. So this study illustrates that there is a possibility of judges still using adjudication forms that may not be effective or even very fair compared to others. Going back to O'Leary's research, he did a study with students that acknowledged that financial resources allowed marching bands to design more elaborate shows. as well as use better equipment than other bands. All of these factors could certainly influence a band's competitive success. In other studies, the high costs and the logistical support for funding a competitive band program are usually brought up as serious roadblocks for many groups. And in Rogers' research, even with the 7-point scale system that I mentioned before, he asked both band directors and principals what they thought of the value of marching band contests were for improving financial support for the band. Band directors on average scored that value at a 4.55, while principals on average scored the value at a 4.43. While this difference is pretty minimal, it does show that school administrators might value financial support for competitive bands less than directors actually themselves. With an increased emphasis on teacher assessment nowadays, administrators may use festival ratings or contest scores to basically use as a quick way to judge the effectiveness of music teachers. Several of the studies below mentioned that contest and festival ratings were being used actually as an indicator of music teacher effectiveness in the classroom or not. In Forbes' study, he stated that there is a demand for this type of evidence and that directors are under pressure from administrators and parents to take their ensembles to contests. Some of the other studies showed that a majority of parents would consider their music program unsuccessful if they didn't enter marching band contests, and people outside the community would probably have similar opinions of the program. Many directors of music ensembles feel that by prioritizing competition, it might come as an expense of the other musical goals that you're trying to achieve. For example, the excessive amount of time spent on learning just a few selections for marching band or traveling to compete at concert band or orchestra concerts or choir concerts, it actually limits the development of sight reading skills and other worthwhile music repertoire for students to perform. Unfortunately, music competitions can perpetuate the notion that winning contests is more important than advancing other musical skills. Before I get to my conclusion, I just wanted to give you guys my perspective on competitions in general. I feel it's not a bad thing for students to experience as long as it doesn't become the actual driving force behind what you're doing in your classroom. I actually took a survey, like I mentioned at the beginning, of my high school music students at Providence Catholic High School, and it showed that 76% of my students either agreed or strongly agreed that competitive marching band is actually their favorite part of being in band the entire year. I asked them several other questions. These results were really surprising, which was 87% of my students said they enjoy competitions. 13% were just neutral about it. I had no students say that they disagreed that they enjoy competitions. And the same for right below when we would travel to compete. They love traveling to compete. No one disagreed with that. The only statistic that I found that students disagreed with was when students said winning awards at contests is important to them, 3% of them disagree with that statement, which I personally was actually really happy about as a director, because I'm always telling my students that these awards that you win are really just a byproduct of your hard work. It should not be the end game. If that's the end game, I think we've lost the point and the drive for what we're really there for, which is learning music and having fun while we make that music with others. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me for this presentation. I really appreciate it. Um, this is something that's really personal to me, obviously, being a high school band director that also takes his students to competitions. So I hope you found something interesting here. And obviously, you probably have been able to generate your own opinion as to whether contests are for your group or for other groups. And that's okay. I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to the presentation. Have a great rest of the summer semester and take care. Thanks.